You know, when you think of royalty, you think of power, prestige, maybe a crown or two. You'd assume all that would guarantee you a pretty grand legacy, right? Well, as we're about to find out, history has a seriously wicked sense of humor. Turns out, all the power in the world can't save you from an absurd, embarrassing, or just plain ironic ending. And tonight, we've got front row seats.
I mean, really think about it. What if you spent your whole life building an empire, fighting wars, making history, only for your final chapter to be written by a clumsy moment, a bathroom emergency, or, yeah, a really angry monkey? It's a humbling thought, isn't it? And it's exactly what happened to the unlucky folks we're talking about today.
So here's the rundown of our unfortunate endings. We're going to see a king take on some bad architecture. Then we'll get into a truly crappy way to go. After that, a secret that literally goes up in smoke. And we'll finish with a wild story involving a primate. Stick around, because we're going to pull a final ironic lesson out of all this mess.
All right, first up, let's talk about King Charles VIII of France. This guy becomes king when he's just 13 years old, and he has huge ambitions. We're talking Alexander the Great-level dreams. He saw himself as a grand conqueror, destined to expand the glory of France. He was especially obsessed with a family claim to the throne of Naples, and was absolutely determined to make it his.
And you can see just how fast things move for him. In 1494, he actually does it. He invades Italy, kicking off this massive conflict. But look how quickly that turns around. Just 1 year later, a bunch of Italian states team up and boot him right out. Still, he's dead set on going back. But there's a problem. War is crazy expensive. By 1498, France is drowning in debt, his big plans are on hold, and his whole legacy is kind of hanging in the balance.
So after surviving the battlefields of Italy and all the scheming of the French court, what's the thing that finally takes him down? You're not going to believe this. On April 7th, 1498, he's on his way to watch a game of jeu de paume. Think of it as early tennis. And this 27-year-old king just smacks his head hard on a low stone doorframe. He apparently just shrugged it off, watched the game, but then suddenly collapsed. He fell into a coma and died just 9 hours later. A would-be conqueror taken out by a doorway. Wow.
Okay, so let's jump to our next story, which might just be one of the most bizarre and undignified deaths in all of history. Let me introduce you to Duke Ching of Qin. He was a big deal ruler back in 6th century BC China, known for being a powerful military leader.
So here's how it all went down, and it's a masterclass in how pride can go horribly, horribly wrong. The Duke gets sick, and a shaman tells him, hey, you're not going to live long enough to eat the new wheat. Well, the Duke doesn't like that one bit, so he has the shaman executed, and then, to really stick it to fate, he orders the unripe wheat to be served. Of course, eating unripe grain gives him some serious stomach problems. He makes a frantic dash for the toilet, but in his haste, he falls right through the seat and into the cesspit below and drowns. A terrible, tragic, and yeah, a truly crappy way to go.
All right, from ancient China, let's fast forward to 19th century Austria. Meet Archduchess Matilda. She was a young woman from a very powerful family, and she had a huge, politically important future all mapped out for her.
Okay, so here's the deal. The plan for Matilda was simple and strategic. Marry the Crown Prince of Italy to lock down a major political alliance. But there was a problem, a secret. Matilda had a smoking habit, and her father had strictly forbidden it. One evening, she's getting ready for the theater, wearing this big, poofy, very flammable dress, and she decides to sneak a cigarette. That's when she hears her father coming down the hall. Panic sets in.
In that split second of panic, she tries to hide the lit cigarette behind her back, tucking it into the folds of her dress, while the dress catches fire immediately. Servants rushed to help, but the burns were just too severe. She lingered for 2 agonizing weeks before passing away. She was only 18 years old. All because of a secret habit and one moment of fear. An entire political future, quite literally, went up in smoke.
For our final story, we're jumping into the 20th century. This is King Alexander of Greece, a young monarch who was plopped onto the throne right in the middle of the chaos of World War I. And yep, you heard that right. That sound is your biggest clue. Because while a world war and all kinds of political drama were swirling around him, King Alexander's doom came from a much, much smaller and hairier source.
See, Alexander wasn't really running the show. He was basically a puppet king, put in place after his father was kicked out and the rest of his family was sent into exile. By all accounts, he was a pretty lonely guy, spending most of his time at a summer palace. His main friend was his dog. Also on the property, The palace steward kept a couple of pet monkeys. You see where this is going.
And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? You'd think his biggest worries would be political enemies or, the Great War happening all around him. But nope, one day he's out walking his dog when one of the monkeys attacks it. Alexander jumps in to break it up, and that's when a second monkey leaps in and bites the king on his leg and torso. Now, the bites themselves weren't deadly. The real problem was that nobody cleaned the wounds properly. An infection set in, and then came sepsis. Sepsis is basically your body's panic button for a bad infection. The immune system goes into such an insane overdrive that it starts damaging your own tissues and organs. Doctors even talked about amputating his leg, but they waited too long. A few weeks later, King Alexander was dead. He was only 27.
So, a doorframe, a toilet, a cigarette, and a monkey. What on earth can these incredibly weird royal deaths actually teach us? Let's try and make some sense of it.
So what have we learned? Well, first off, power is no match for the simple laws of physics, like a stone hand hitting a head lintel. Second, trying to defy fate can lead you to meet it in the most humbling way possible. Third, one tiny, panicked choice, like where to hide a cigarette, can completely derail an empire's grand plans. And of course, a very practical lesson from King Alexander: always, always clean your wounds. I guess the biggest takeaway is that fate, or history, or whatever you want to call it, has a really dark sense of humor.
When you think about it, these stories are more than just historical trivia. They're a really powerful reminder that our legacy isn't always defined by our biggest achievements. Sometimes it all comes down to one final absurd moment. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When your story is all written, what do you want that final line to be?